all right, let's face it, most of us are going to continue to eat bread all the time, if not every single day. Nothing beats having a delicious piece of toast with butter on it. It's delicious, but it's more of a luxury item rather than a staple food because of what has changed about bread over the last couple of decades. So today we're going to be talking about how bread is one of the largest contributors of our daily intake of emulsifiers and refined grains that can actually have a big impact on our health. We're also going to talk about the risk on chronic disease and whether this leads to weight gain, because I think bread's got a bit of a branding problem, and I kind of want to clarify some of the points around what makes bread healthy versus unhealthy and how you can make better choices about our daily bread. Now, the first thing that we should try and get our heads around is whether bread makes you put on weight. So the statement that bread equals weight gain, I think, is far too simplistic, and it depends on a few parameters. The first thing is the quality of the bread that you're consuming. So more and more evidence suggests that carbohydrate quality matters a lot more than just whether something is a carbohydrate or not. So one study published in JAMA found that substituting refined grains, starchy vegetables, and sugary beverages, so these are your sugar-sweetened beverages, your Coke, your Pepsi, all that kind of stuff, with equal amounts of whole fruits, whole grains, and non-starchy vegetables was tied to a decrease in weight over a 4-year study period. So that speaks to this idea that it's not carbohydrates per se, it is the quality of those carbohydrates. And if you sub carbohydrate for carbohydrate in equal amounts, you're going to have a drastically different effect on weight as a parameter, as an outcome. So that's the first thing that you want to ask yourself. Is this quality carbohydrate, i.e. is this a quality bread versus a poor quality bread? The other thing is what you eat that with, what you eat your bread with is very, very important. So if you're having bread with Nutella or butter, like I said in the example, or strawberry jam, we have a lot of strawberry jam in the UK, these high sugar spreads, that's going to have an impact on whether you put on weight with that bread or not. Whereas if you have bread with vegetables and beans and the side of a full meal that's got protein and lots of fiber, and that's a very, very different way of consuming bread. A lot of people have bread in the form of sandwiches in the UK. So these grab and go sandwiches, they're filled with pretty much nothing. The type of bread itself is of poor quality, hence bread gets a bad reputation. Whereas the way I have bread, I literally had bread earlier today. It was a whole grain bread that I've made myself. We have a bunch of recipes on the Doctor's Kitchen website and the Doctor's Kitchen app that you can find in the link down below. I had that with celery, spring onions, some beans, and some leftover chicken from the night before. That is a much healthier way of having bread versus the way bread is presented to us in most grab-and-go environments, supermarket environments, and cafes. Also, the quantity of bread that you consume is going to have an impact on whether you gain weight or not. This is probably the most obvious thing to say, but one of the things that gets missed out a lot in these conversations, rather than just thinking about, okay, this is bread, this is refined, it's going to make me put on weight. The quantity, how much of that bread you consume is going to have an impact. Now, I admit, if I have a big loaf of sourdough, it's very hard for me to not consume that big loaf of bread because I love sourdough. It's great. It's got a beautiful flavor to it. It's got a sugary note to it. When you toast it with butter, like I just want to go slice after slice. That's a different sort of part of the equation, i.e. the sort of dopamine effect, the sort of sugar hit effect of bread. But ultimately, what's going to determine of whether that loaf of bread or the slice of bread is going to be healthy for me or not is how much I consume. So the amount of bread you consume is a very, very important factor when it comes to whether bread is going to make you put on weight or not. The benefits of eating quality bread are incredible. So if you have a high quality bread, one that's made out of whole grains, one that you've perhaps supplemented with walnuts and seeds, we actually have an oat-based and buckwheat-based bread that we have on the Doctor's Kitchen app. It is so much higher in fiber. It is packed full of micronutrients like folate, iron, and magnesium naturally rather than having them added to them after the fact. And it also has some phytochemicals in from the whole grain. So aventhramides, for example, are unique to oat, and we put oats in our bread. Lignans are a type of plant chemical that you find in flaxseed and rye. These are things that have a unique antioxidant effects. And why fiber is so important and some of those micronutrients is because it feeds those gut microbiota. that not only support your colon, they support your gut cells, they also increase the mucin layer, which is a layer in the digestive tract that has tons of microbes in. And within this mucin layer, you also have these microbes that produce metabolites. And one of those is a natural GLP-1. So it's an agonist to the appetite suppressant peptides that will signal to your brain that you're satiated, that you've actually had enough. When you have more fiber in your diet, it's a lot more satiating. So you're less likely to overeat, which is the biggest factor as to why people put on weight in the first place. So these are some of the benefits of eating a high quality bread: high in fiber, high in polyphenols, high in those plant chemicals that you find in those whole grains. And it also has some unique minerals and vitamins as well that we know are generally healthy for, overall healthy for us. There are better sources of bread out there, and one of them is sourdough. Now, sourdough is getting a bit of a reputation of being a healthier type of bread. Sourdough is a dough fermented with lactic acid bacteria in addition to the yeast. This is called a starter. So you'll find starters being sold online, because these starters, once you start feeding them with water and flour, they just grow and grow and grow. You have to keep them in your freezer. You have to stop them. You have to give them away. And these starters are essentially what creates this fermentation process, and it's what gives rise to the potential benefits. One of these potential benefits is the fermentation increases nutrient absorption. So not only is it a delicious sour tang, but it actually improves the accessibility of certain nutrients that your body wouldn't be able to get from a regular bread. So it increases the availability of nutrients that are locked into the whole grains, into the actual grain of the bread itself. And these can ensure that you're absorbing a lot more of the nutrients when you're consuming sourdough bread compared to bread only made with yeast. So the addition of this lactic acid bacteria, the starter, is something that can actually help nutrient absorption from bread, from the grain itself. The other thing is improved gut health and digestion and tolerance of bread. So sourdough fermentation has actually been shown to reduce FODMAPs. So these are fermentable oligodisaccharides, types of sugars that certain people have issues with. And in wheat bread, it actually reduces the levels of these FODMAPs. And so the fermentation process could potentially help alleviate certain gastrointestinal distress symptoms that people who are sensitive to FODMAPs would experience. So it increases the digestibility, it increases the nutrient availability, but there's also one big caveat, because sourdough is having, this sort of real big branding moment at the moment. Everything is about sourdough. The evidence is still actually quite conflicted, and many studies don't always show the benefits of sourdough compared to regular bread. And the reason why might be because of how we label sourdough. Sourdough is a bit of a minefield when it comes to whether this is a true sourdough or a quote-unquote fake sourdough. There's a lack of established guidelines internationally that recognize the actual definition of what is sourdough versus a regular bread with yeast. So the way it's made, the microbial composition, the fermentation process, the different types of flour, this can all vary massively and potentially influence the nutritional properties of that bread to varying amounts. So in short, just because something says sourdough doesn't necessarily make it better. If you're making sourdough yourself, there's a different story. You can pretty much guarantee that is going to be a healthier version of the bread that you would buy off a supermarket shelves. And if you know your baker and you know that they're like making it from scratch, you can pretty much bet that it's going to be much healthier than the supermarket breads that you find available to everyone. Those are rapidly created, and they don't have the time and the processing available to those breads to actually extract a lot of the nutrient value from the grains itself. Just a quick one. If you want to take your health to the next level, I highly recommend you check out the Doctor's Kitchen app. It gives you hundreds of recipes that you can tailor according to your health goals, whether that's inflammation, menopause, improving your brain, increasing your heart health. There are tons of recipes that you can filter according to your dietaries and allergens as well. Click on the link down below and check out the Doctor's Kitchen app. Back to the podcast. So what are the healthiest breads to eat? So quick history, the process of making bread, of converting flour into leavened bread, has actually changed quite a bit throughout the years. Traditional bread making involves a long, non-controlled fermentation process. And that uses unrefined whole grain flour made of locally available grains and root plants without any food additives. So already you can tell a lot has changed since then. We add a lot of food additives to our breads. There's a lot of emulsifiers, a lot of things to maintain the quality of taste rather than the nutritional components of bread itself. Modern bread baking, as I alluded to earlier, is super fast, and it's a controlled industrial process, and it uses mass-produced refined flour, commercial yeast starters, and mechanical dough making and food additives and bread improvers. So this already, in your mind, you should understand that this has moved from an artisanal product that you make with your hands, that you make with very simple, unrefined ingredients, to something that is now being made at scale and is essentially ultra-processed. Very, very different ingredients that are used in both those different types of bread. So already you'll know that, like, completely different. So just saying bread is completely different. They're all very, very different products. Plus, these global trade networks have made wheat bread very easy to get, even in places where wheat isn't grown. So the refined wheat breads are some of the top sellers worldwide. And actually, a lot of places shouldn't even have bread in them. And it's because of the way we've produced it, the speed at which we can produce it, and the preservatives in these bread that make it so widely available, which is both a good and a bad thing. I like to see both sides of the story, because it's made commercially available bread present in so many different places where you'd otherwise have no food whatsoever. So in one way, it's a good thing that we can actually get bread to these places, and another way, it's a bad thing because it's essentially ultra processed as well. The bottom tier of breads are essentially heavily processed, and unfortunately, they're also heavily marketed. So you're going to see a lot of these breads in most corner stores and most supermarkets and most markets in general, because they have increased shelf life. They're a lot cheaper, and there's a consistency of product, which is something that sellers would prefer as well. And I'm talking about mass sellers here as well. So the additives, the flavorings, the refined grains, they're baked at higher temperatures, and actually the height of temperatures may also have a negative impact on the quality of the bread by producing harmful compounds as a result of the Maillard reaction. So if you think about deep fried fatty foods, one of the reasons why they're bad for us is not just because of the starting ingredients, but it's also because of the high temperatures that we take them to. So if we take refined flours to a high temperature, you're getting a lot more of these reactions that can actually yield some harmful compounds that could be pro-cancerous and inflammation producing as well. So that's one of another way in which these ultra-processed breads are potentially harmful as well as the lack of the starting ingredients that they should have in. So less fiber, less nutrients, less whole grains that actually give bread some of the benefits that I referred to earlier. They tend to be less filling and satisfying. They could cause larger spikes in your glucose levels. And it obviously would add to your intake of highly processed foods, which we know is highly, highly correlated with many health problems as well. How do you determine whether a bread is ultra-processed or one of these commercially processed breads versus an artisanal bread? There's some really quick, simple rules of thumb and really, really quick sort of ways in which you can tell. One, white bread is generally always ultra-processed, unfortunately. The other one are most supermarket breads. So if you flip the bread and you look at the ingredients in the back label, you'll see the emulsifiers, the additives. It should only be 3 or 4 ingredients, and most of them have upwards of 12 plus. And particularly in America, there tend to be a lot more ingredients than the ones that we get in the UK as well. Generally, mid-tier or artisanal breads, they follow traditional aspects of homemade production at high volumes, but it can still be processed as well. So they can still be made with poor quality ingredients and use like poor starting products. So a lot of mid-tier bakeries or like commercial bakeries that are popping up in sort of different areas in the UK, you'll find like certain cafes like Gale's, etc., they use poor quality starting products. Even though the bread looks like an artisanal bread, it's usually been put through quite mass production processes. And additives are also added to it as well. So it's not too different from the breads that you find on supermarket shelves as well. In terms of the top tier, which is pretty much the minority of breads these days, I would say it's probably about 10-15%. They don't have additives, they don't have emulsifiers, they don't have flavorings. They're made with multiple whole grains, so they have high nutrients, more fiber because they contain a lot more of the bran and the germ of the actual grain, and they have fewer markers of the Maillard reaction, i.e. the temperatures that have been taken very, very high. And actually, there was a study published in 2022 that analyzed 4 types of soft bread, 10 industrial, 6 artisanal, and 8 homemade. And they found that the products of the Maillard reaction, so these high temperatures, were less abundant in homemade bread compared to the industrial bread, probably due to lower baking temperatures that you can achieve with a domestic oven compared to the industrial ovens, which obviously can go way, way hotter as well. So the things that I would say when looking for quality bread in the stores is to go for 100% whole grains in the first instance. That should be one of the first ingredients as well, like whole wheat or oats or barley or rye. You want to look for a high fiber bread. And when I say high fiber, we're looking at over 6 grams per 100 grams of bread product. And that should be clearly demonstrated on the label as well. You want to look for minimal ingredients. Like I said, quality bread should only be 4 main ingredients: whole grain, or wholemeal flour, water, yeast, or a sourdough starter, maybe some salt as well. Sometimes you find seeds, sometimes you find extra virgin olive oil. If you can recognize the ingredients, that's fine. But you don't want to be finding additives or preservatives, flavorings, or added sugar in those products, because that's a telltale sign that this is going to be an ultra-processed bread product as well. The other things that I think are okay to have in: flax seeds, stone milled flour. A lot of these terms, unfortunately, aren't protected. So I can put a mass-produced product on the shelves and say local grains or milled flour or sourdough. And these terms don't really mean anything. So you really have to dig deep and investigate as to whether this is actually a product that you trust and you think has gone through the due process to actually make a good quality bread product. There are a few health claims that I always sort of think is a bit of a red flag, because some manufacturers like to make misleading claims about their labels using terms like whole grain or multigrain without actually meeting the criteria for those designations. So it's not good enough to see those labels on the front of the packet. You want to see what the ingredients are. So always turn the loaf over and look at the back of the packet there. 3 things that I would say you want to look out for, because they're health claims that don't necessarily mean it's healthy. Gluten-free doesn't necessarily mean healthy. These can be some of the most heavily processed products out there, with a mixture of different refined flours, lots of thickeners, lots of gums, because to mimic the texture of actual bread, it's quite hard with gluten-free products these days. So gluten-free does not necessarily mean healthy. Multigrain does not necessarily mean whole grain. So multigrain has got this term and this sort of idea of being whole grain because they usually pair multigrain with an image of something that's whole grain. That's not the case. So just because it says multigrain in the title doesn't necessarily mean it's actually whole grain in the back. And the other thing is sourdough. So sourdough doesn't necessarily mean better quality or less processed. It just means they've put sourdough in the front and it's sourdough style or sourdough flavor. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it is less processed and not ultra processed as well. So what I would say is, if you want to look for the best bread, go and speak to your baker, find out what their process is, where they source their flours from. Some of the best bakers, like E5 Bakehouse, for example, in the UK and London, have a direct relationship with their millers and their flours. They don't import. They usually use it from organic farms or regenerative farming methods. Wild farms or wild farmed in the UK do a very good product. According to a friend of mine who's been on the podcast, Karen O'Donoghue, who is a baker herself and prides herself in sort of that ensuring that the products that she uses are very, very high quality. I would look for no-knead loaves and overnight. You can actually look at some of these recipes online for no-knead. And if you look on thedoctorskitchen.com, if you just click on the link down below, you'll be able to see some of the no-knead breads that we actually have. And then the other thing is, I would say try bread making yourself, mixing up the flours, adding seeds, ensuring that you're not scared of bread, because you compare even a low quality bread with a high quality meal, and it's really looking at the overarching perspective of what your meal looks like. Has it got fiber? Has it got protein? Has it got lots of whole ingredients? Even if you do have a bit of poor quality bread on the side, as long as you're not over consuming that, it's not going to have as much of an impact on your health as the rest of the ingredients as part of your meal as well. Let me know if I've missed anything in the comments. If you want me to talk about bread again, let me know down there, and I'll see you here next time. If you loved that episode, you'll love this one where I do a deep dive into the health benefits and the health disadvantages of certain types of oats. You can check that out right here.